My name is Alex Vance. To my family, I am the human equivalent of dust. I am the 32-year-old son they talk about in hushed, apologetic tones, the one whose hands are perpetually stained with the earth, whose greatest ambition in their eyes is to operate a slightly larger backhoe. They call me the digger. It's not meant as a compliment. It's a label, a box, a 6-foot-deep hole where they've buried any expectation of me amounting to anything. What they don't know is that the dirt under my fingernails is from Sublevel 9 of Project Cerberus. It's a subterranean data arc, a silent titan of titanium and fiber optics buried so deep within the Earth's crust that it's designed to survive the apocalypse. In my family's sprawling, ostentatious mansion, I'm Alex the Digger. But in a geologically stable cavern a mile beneath the Nevada desert, I am the architect, the one they call when the Earth itself threatens to shift. Tonight, none of that matters. Tonight is my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, a golden jubilee of manufactured perfection held at their estate that reeks of new money and old grudges. An estate, ironically, that I prevented from being foreclosed on with a single anonymous wire transfer they attributed to a stroke of luck in the market. I stood near a marble fountain in the garden, feeling as conspicuous as a muddy boot on a silk rug. The air was thick with the cloying scent of wilting roses and entitlement. My gift for them sat on a table laden with offerings from their wealthy friends: designer watches, first-class tickets to Paris, gaudy sculptures. My gift was a simple, framed piece of vellum. On it, I had meticulously recreated by hand the original 1880 survey map of the land this very house was built on, a piece of history I'd unearthed from a forgotten county archive. It was a nod to our roots, a symbol of the foundation upon which everything else was built. My older sister, Amelia, the family's polished trophy and a ruthless PR executive, glided over to the table. She picked up my gift, holding it between two perfectly manicured fingers as if it were contaminated. A dry, dismissive laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, Alex, still playing in the dirt, I see. How quaint." She placed it back down, deliberately behind a comically large bottle of champagne. My father, Richard, joined her, clapping a hand on her shoulder. "Every family has to have a sentimentalist, Amelia. It reminds the rest of us how far we've come." His smile was a thin, cruel line. It was the same smile he wore when he told me my geological engineering degree was a very expensive way to learn how to dig holes. The same smile he had when I used the signing bonus from Cerberus to anonymously clear his disastrous business debts. I felt the familiar coldness spread through my chest, the quiet resignation. I had endured it for years. For my mother, Eleanor, a woman who had long ago traded her voice for a life of comfort. I watched them mingle, laughing with senators and CEOs, their world a glittering facade I secretly propped up. The final crushing blow came when my own mother, prompted by a sharp glance from my father, drifted over to me. "Alex, dear," she began, her voice a strained whisper, "the photographer is about to take the main family portrait with the Hendersons. Perhaps you could make sure the caterers in the back are doing all right. You know, with your hands-on expertise." The message was brutally clear. I was the stain they wanted to scrub out of their perfect family picture. For years I had been their silent benefactor, their secret janitor, cleaning up their messes while they pretended I didn't exist. I looked at my mother's face, at the flicker of shame in her eyes before it was stamped out by a lifetime of practiced obedience. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it turned to ice. "Of course, Mother," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I'll go check on the help." As I turned, a new sound cut through the drone of polite conversation. The low, serious hum of engines. Not the purr of a guest's luxury sedan, but the heavy guttural sound of utility. 3 matte black SUVs, the kind with no logos and tinted windows that absorb light, had rolled up the long driveway and stopped, blocking the exit. 8 figures emerged. They weren't guests. They were dressed in severe dark suits, moving with an unnerving, synchronized purpose that made my father's hired security look like children playing dress-up. They fanned out, their eyes scanning, assessing, securing. Amelia's laugh died in her throat. My father's jovial mask slipped, replaced by a scowl of annoyance and confusion. He looked from the men to me, a sudden sick realization dawning on his face. He thought they were here for me. He thought my shady side hustles had finally caught up with me, that I was about to be hauled away in disgrace in front of all his important friends. A cruel, vindicated smirk began to form on his lips. He was about to witness the spectacular implosion of his failure of a son. But the men in suits paid me no mind. They were creating a path, and through that path a woman walked. She was tall, with silver hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. She wore a tailored, charcoal pantsuit, and her face was a mask of cold, intellectual authority. This was Director Eva Rostova, the civilian head of the entire Cerberus program, the woman who answered only to a select committee at the Pentagon. She ignored the gasping guests. She walked past my father as if he were a statue. Her piercing blue eyes swept the crowd once, then locked onto mine. She strode directly towards me, her flat-heeled shoes making no sound on the manicured lawn. The entire party had fallen into a dead, breathless silence. She stopped a few feet from me, her expression unreadable. And then she spoke, her voice not loud, but carrying an absolute, unbreakable authority that sliced through the stunned quiet. "Mr. Vance," she said, and the formal address was like a gunshot in the silent garden. "Forgive the intrusion. There is a developing seismic event near the Omega Array. The primary geological team has hit a fault line they can't model. The Aegis protocol has been triggered. They are awaiting your immediate command." She held out a hardened military-grade tablet. On its screen was a real-time, three-dimensional topographic map, glowing with concentric red rings that pulsed like a malevolent heartbeat. The words Aegis Protocol hung in the air, an alien phrase that meant nothing to the stunned crowd but everything to me. It was the fail-safe of all fail-safes. The digital scream for help when billions of dollars of national security infrastructure was at risk of being crushed by the planet itself. I looked past Director Rostova, my gaze sweeping over my family. My father's jaw was slack, his face a canvas of utter stupefied disbelief. The cruel smirk had melted into a mask of pale, waxy confusion. My sister Amelia stood frozen, her wineglass tilted at a precarious angle, her mind clearly struggling to reconcile the man she called the digger with the scene unfolding before her. And my mother looked at me as if for the first time, her hand fluttering to her throat, a dawning horror and wonder in her eyes. The shame she'd felt moments ago was being replaced by a terrifying, new understanding. They had thought my world was about to end. They were just now realizing they had never even known what my world was. I took the tablet from the director. Its weight was familiar in my hands. "Give me secure comms," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the tremor I felt inside, and a quiet place to work. Director Rostova simply nodded to one of the men in suits, who immediately gestured towards the main house. But I didn't move. I turned my attention back to my family, who were now the unwilling audience of a play they couldn't comprehend. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. I let the silence stretch, letting them marinate in their shock. "Mother," I said, my voice calm and precise, "you were concerned about the help. I can assure you, the only people here who need help right now are standing on this lawn." I gave a small, pointed glance at her and my father. Then I looked directly at my father, Richard, the man who saw me as a liability. "For the last 7 years, every time your brilliant investments cratered, every time your company teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, an anonymous wire transfer would appear in your accounts. You called it a stroke of luck. Amelia called it Dad's market genius. It wasn't luck, and it certainly wasn't genius." I let that sink in. I saw the gears turning in their heads, the frantic recalculation of their entire reality. "The anonymous benefactor who paid for this party," I continued, my voice as cold and sharp as a geologist's pick, "the one who funded Amelia's disastrous PR startup until it finally turned a profit, the one who bought this land back from the bank after you leveraged it for the 3rd time, that was me. It was all from my quaint little hobby." The devastation on their faces was a masterpiece of karmic art. It wasn't just shock. It was the humiliating realization that their entire empire of ego and arrogance was built on a foundation they had not only ignored but actively despised. The foundation was me. I held up the tablet, the pulsing red rings reflecting in my eyes. "This," I said to them, "is my real work. While you were playing games with your friends' money, I was building something that ensures you have a world left to play in." I turned my back on them, a final, clean severance. As I walked towards the house with Director Rostova and her team, I could hear the first frantic whispers erupting behind me, the confused questions from their powerful friends, the sound of my family's perfectly curated world beginning to crack and crumble. The digger had just struck bedrock, and their entire gilded mansion was about to fall into the sinkhole of truth I had opened beneath it. I didn't look back. I had a planet to save. The fate of my family, for the first time in my life, felt utterly and completely insignificant. We commandeered my father's study, a room I'd seldom been allowed to enter as a child. It was a monument to his ego, all dark wood, leather-bound books he'd never read, and self-congratulatory plaques. My father's world. Within minutes, Rostova's team had transformed it into a mobile command center. Encrypted satellite links were established, schematics were projected onto the walls, and the hushed, urgent language of crisis response filled the air. I sat in my father's oversized leather chair, the tablet in my lap, the pulsing red rings of the Omega array now the sole focus of my universe. The problem was terrifyingly simple. A newly discovered unmapped fault line was showing signs of imminent slippage, directly beneath the primary server cavern of Project Cerberus. The local team's models predicted a catastrophic shear event within the next 90 minutes, an earthquake that wouldn't just rattle the facility, but could potentially collapse the entire subterranean structure, burying the nation's most sensitive data under 1 million tons of rock and earth. The on-site engineers are evacuating non-essential personnel, Rostova stated, her voice a low, steady hum beside me. Their projections show a 78% chance of total structural failure. They want to initiate a full data purge to prevent the hardware from falling into the wrong hands if the cavern is compromised. A purge would set the program back a decade, I said without looking up, my fingers flying across the tablet, pulling up geological resonance scans and deep earth pressure readings. The data flowed into my mind, a language I understood better than my own family's. They're reading the pressure waves, not the rock composition. They're scared. Get me a direct link to Dr. Eris Thorne on site. A moment later, the face of a harried, sweat-drenched man in his late 50s appeared on a screen. He was the lead geologist at Cerberus, a brilliant man who was now staring into the abyss. Alex, thank God, the models are all red. The whole plate is unstable. We have to wipe the servers and get everyone out. Negative, Eris, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. Your models are based on surface-level granite composition. You're not accounting for the metamorphic shift at sub-level 9. That's not granite down there. It's a green schist amphibolite fascia. It's more pliable. It will bend, not break. The silence on the other end was deafening. I was challenging years of established geological doctrine based on a gut feeling and a few slivers of data from my own deep core scans I'd run months ago, scans my superiors had dismissed as inconclusive anomalies. Alex, that's insane, Eris stammered. If I'm wrong, the data is lost anyway, I shot back. But if I'm right, you're about to destroy a decade of work out of fear. I see a way to use the pressure, not fight it. We can vent the buildup. Look at seismic node 4B. There's a natural fissure, a lava tube that leads west for 3 kilometers. It's a sealed tube, Alex. It's been dormant for 1,000 years. Nothing is dormant forever, I muttered, my mind racing. I began inputting a sequence of commands, codes that would activate a series of precisely placed harmonic drills within the facility. Tools designed for expansion, not emergency response. I'm going to use resonance drilling to reopen that fissure. We're going to give the earthquake a path. We'll guide the pressure wave away from the data arc. You're going to steer an earthquake? Eris asked, his voice a mix of awe and terror. I'm going to give it a suggestion. I corrected. Director Rostova stood beside me, watching, her face impassive. She hadn't questioned me once. She had staked her career and the integrity of the entire project on my judgment. The pressure in the room was now as intense as the tectonic forces I was trying to control. As I worked, the study door creaked open. My father stood there, his face ashen. The arrogant patriarch was gone, replaced by a confused, diminished old man. Alex, he began, his voice raspy. What is all this? I didn't look up from the screen. I'm working, Dad, something you always said I wasn't very good at. But these people, Director Rostova, they said you're in command." The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he couldn't parse. "Someone has to be," I replied, my fingers still moving, initiating the first drill sequence. A low hum vibrated through the tablet. Far beneath the earth, a titanium drill head began to spin. He took another step into the room. "The money? You paid for everything?" "Yes." "Why? Why didn't you say anything?" We treated you." I finally looked up from the tablet, my eyes meeting his. For the first time, I didn't see a tyrant. I saw a man, a flawed, weak man, confronted with the full scope of his own ignorance. "I didn't do it for you," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I did it because it was easier to pay your debts than to listen to your complaints. It was a transaction. You needed money, I had it. You needed to feel superior, I let you. It was simpler that way." The brutal honesty of it seemed to hit him harder than any shouted accusation could have. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Before he could respond, Dr. Thorne's voice crackled over the comms again, urgent and sharp. "Alex, we have a spike at Node 3. The pressure is building faster than you calculated. The drills are straining." My attention snapped back to the screen. He was right. A secondary pressure wave was building, a ripple effect I hadn't anticipated. The screen flashed a new warning: 84% chance of structural failure. My plan wasn't working. It was making things worse. The entire cavern was groaning, and through the comms I could hear the terrifying sound of stressed metal and cracking rock. The earth was fighting back, and it was winning. A cold dread, sharp and suffocating, washed over me. The numbers on the screen were no longer abstract data points. They were a death sentence for Project Cerberus and everyone still inside. The air in my father's study grew thick with unspoken panic. The confident technicians who had set up the command center now exchanged worried glances. Director Rostova's placid expression finally cracked, a line of tension tightening her jaw. I had made a catastrophic miscalculation. "Alex, what's the new protocol?" Eris Thorne's voice was strained, the sound of cracking rock now a constant, terrifying roar in the background of his transmission. "My men are reporting critical stress fractures in the main support pillars. We have to abort your plan." My mind was a maelstrom. The green schist fascia, the pliable rock I had banked everything on, wasn't just bending. It was compressing, squeezing the fault line like a fist and amplifying the pressure instead of absorbing it. My elegant solution had become a death trap. My father stood by the door, forgotten, a ghost at a funeral. All his life he'd thought I was a failure, and in the one moment that truly mattered, I was proving him right. "Abort," I said, my own voice sounding distant. "Pull the drills back, seal the cavern, initiate the data purge and full evacuation. That's an order." It was the ultimate admission of defeat. Rostova closed her eyes for a brief second, a flicker of profound disappointment. The team began relaying my commands, their voices grim. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of my failure pressing down on me, heavier than any mountain. And then, something my father had said years ago, an offhand, dismissive comment, echoed in my memory. He had been mocking me for spending a summer mapping abandoned mines in Appalachia. "What a waste of time," he'd sneered. "Chasing ghosts in worthless holes in the ground. Water always finds a way, Alex. It's the path of least resistance. You should learn from that." Water. The path of least resistance. My eyes shot back to the tablet, my fingers flying with renewed purpose, pulling up a different set of schematics. Not the geological surveys, but the facility's hydroengineering plans. Cerberus was built deep, but it required a massive, closed-loop cooling system that drew from a deep subterranean aquifer. An aquifer I had personally mapped and designated as the project's primary water source. "Wait," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to make everyone in the room freeze. "Belay that order. Keep the drills active." "Alex, what are you doing?" Rostova demanded, stepping closer. "There's no time for another gamble." "It's not a gamble, it's physics," I said, my mind racing faster than it ever had before. I located the main coolant intake valves on the schematic. "Eris, I need you to do something that's going to sound insane. I need you to reverse the flow on the primary coolant pumps and open intake valves C, D, and F. All of them. And I need you to do it 30 seconds ago." There was a stunned silence. "Reverse the flow?" Eris asked, incredulous. "You want me to flood the primary access tunnels? That's where my teams are. It's our only way out." The evacuation is already underway. They're past those tunnels, I countered, my eyes glued to the pressure readings. The aquifer is under immense hydrostatic pressure. If we open those intakes, we're not just flooding the tunnels, we're introducing thousands of tons of high-pressure water directly into the shear zone. We're going to use hydrofracturing. We can't steer the earthquake, but we can lubricate the fault line. We can make it slip, a controlled release instead of a catastrophic rupture. It was a desperate, unprecedented move, using a facility's own lifeblood to intentionally trigger a seismic event. Rostova stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning comprehension. She saw the terrifying logic in my madness. "Do it," she said into her comms, her voice like steel. "Authorize Vance's command, now." On the screen, I watched as Eris's team frantically rerouted the pumps. A new icon appeared on the schematic, a rush of blue representing the water, pouring into the angry red of the pressure zone. For a heart-stopping 10 seconds, nothing happened. The pressure readings continued to climb. The sound of groaning rock intensified. I could hear Eris shouting in the background, "It's not working! God, it's not working!" And then it did. A new vibration appeared on the sensors. A low, powerful shudder, completely different from the violent shaking before. The pressure at the epicenter plummeted. On the 3D map, I watched in awe as the fault line slipped, a clean, smooth release of energy that flowed harmlessly along the path of the lava tube I had initially targeted. The violent, destructive force had been tamed, soothed by the water, and guided away from the data arc. A series of smaller, harmless aftershocks followed, and then quiet. The red rings on the map faded to yellow, then to a calm, steady green. The room was silent, save for the sound of our own ragged breathing. Eris Thorne's voice came back over the comms, weak with disbelief and relief. "Seismic activity neutralized. Structural integrity is at 99.8%. The cavern it's stable. Alex, how in God's name did you know that would work?" I leaned back, the adrenaline finally draining from my system, leaving me hollowed out. I looked towards the door, where my father was still standing, his face pale, his eyes wide with a look I'd never seen from him before. It wasn't anger or disappointment or even pride. It was awe. "My father once told me," I said, my voice quiet but clear enough for the whole room to hear, "that water always finds a way." For once, he was right about something. The silence that followed was profound. In the aftermath of the crisis, the command center in my father's study slowly demobilized. The technicians packed their gear with a quiet efficiency, their faces holding a new respect as they glanced my way. Director Rostova concluded her final call with the Pentagon, her report concise and direct, naming me as the sole reason Project Cerberus was still operational. She walked over to me, the hard lines of her face softening slightly. "The preliminary damage reports are minimal," she said, her voice low. "You didn't just save the project, Alex. You gave us a new geological tool. Hydrofracturing as a seismic dampener. It's revolutionary. The Joint Chiefs want to debrief you personally. A car will be here at 600. She paused, then extended her hand. "You have a rare talent, Mr. Vance. Don't ever let anyone make you believe otherwise." I shook her hand, the formal gesture feeling surreal in the gaudy wood-paneled study. As she and her team departed, leaving as silently as they had arrived, I was left alone in the quiet room. Alone, except for my father. He hadn't moved from the doorway. He looked like a man who had watched the world he knew dissolve and reshape itself into something incomprehensible. The arrogance was gone, stripped away layer by layer with every panicked report and every calm command I had issued. "Alex," he finally said, his voice cracking. He walked into the room, not as its owner, but as a visitor. He stopped in front of his own desk, where I was still sitting. I had no idea." "I know," I said. There was no anger left in me, only a vast, empty weariness. "All these years I called you the digger. I thought you were wasting your life, your potential. I was ashamed." He looked down at his own hands, manicured and soft. "And all that time you were holding up the world, while I was holding you down." Tears welled in his eyes, the first I had ever seen. "The money wasn't a transaction, Alex. It was a lifeline. You threw it to me again and again while I was drowning in my own foolish pride, and I cursed you for it because I didn't know it was you. Can you ever forgive me?" I stood up, the leather of his chair groaning in the silence. I looked at the broken man before me, the father who had been a source of so much quiet pain. Forgiveness felt like a distant country I wasn't sure I wanted to visit. "I don't know," I said honestly. "What you and Amelia and Mother did, it wasn't just about the money. You made me feel like I was worthless. You tried to erase me from my own family." I walked past him, towards the door. "That's a deep hole, Dad, and I'm not sure it can ever be filled." As I stepped out into the hallway, my mother and Amelia were there, huddled together. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. They had clearly been listening. Amelia, the sharp-tongued PR queen, looked utterly deflated, her usual armor of sarcasm and condescension shattered. "Alex," she whispered, the name sounding strange on her lips without a mocking tone attached. "The things I said, I was just following Dad's lead. I'm so sorry." My mother stepped forward, her hands clasped together. "We were wrong, Alex. So terribly wrong. We were blinded by all of this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent, empty house around them. "We valued the wrong things. We valued everything but you." I looked at their faces, at the ruins of the family dynamic that had governed my entire life. I had wanted their respect, their approval for so long. Now that I had it, I found that I no longer needed it. "The car is coming for me at 6, I said, my voice final. "I have a debriefing at the Pentagon. I don't know when I'll be back." I paused, looking at each of them in turn. "Maybe it's time you all learned to stand on your own foundation for a while. See how stable it really is." I walked out the grand front door, not looking back. The cool night air felt clean, fresh. The party was long over. The wealthy guests and their empty praise all gone. All that remained was a broken family in a hollow mansion, haunted by the ghost of a son they never knew. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "The anonymous accounts that have supported Vance Holdings and its subsidiaries for the last 7 years are now closed. All auto payments have been canceled. Effective immediately." I didn't reply. I sat in the back of the government SUV as it sped through the desert dawn, the rising sun glinting off the distant mountains. For the first time, I wasn't digging myself out of a hole. I was standing on top of the world I had built, and the whispers of inadequacy had finally, blissfully fallen silent. My hands weren't stained with dirt. They were the hands that had stopped the earth from shaking, and I was finally free.